Cancer sucks. I'm Brixenta. Welcome. If you're new here, I'm a fitness instructor and singer. Welcome. And this was my first holiday season. This is my first holiday season. Right now, this week is the week of Thanksgiving without my aunt. So when I was 17 years old, my grandma died, who did all of our big family Christmases and Thanksgivings. Of course, we did like stuff with the immediate family too, but we had like big, huge family get-togethers and did all the big meals and all these things. And it was a special time of year. And then when my grandma died, when I was 17, my aunt took over. And we had big family Christmases and Thanksgivings at her house, my aunt and uncle's house. And so, my entire life, the weekend before, the Sunday before Thanksgiving is when we would do our Thanksgiving. Things changed over the years, of course, but like it was still tradition. It was still two of the big times that we saw the whole family. And this year, my mom is getting up there in age, and she's got vertigo, so she doesn't really travel well. So we didn't go to Thanksgiving this year. May or may not go to Christmas. Probably not. I'm guessing my mom won't be able to. But it's also just so different without my aunt, that like my aunt was kind of like the glue. And so now kind of everything's like really different. And what happened was in May, the day before Mother's Day, she went into the hospital with pneumonia. The day before that, I found out she had pneumonia, and she gets it like once or twice a year, pretty much every year for the past, 15 years. So I didn't really think much of it. It was kind of frustrating because I'm like, if she would just stop smoking, she would stop getting freaking pneumonia every year. But at the same time, it was just like, I know she knows this, and so I can't make her do anything. And I was getting to the point where when COVID happened, I was on my deathbed. And I recovered, thankfully, but it left me with permanent damage, and I can't be anywhere near smokers, like when they're smoking. Like if I have my window rolled down when I'm driving down the street, I have a flare up. If somebody's smoking a cigarette, it's really bad, and it's frustrating because if you are somebody that smokes, I am sorry, because what I'm about to say is going to offend you, but I think smokers are the absolute most selfish people in the entire world. I still love you, but the thing is, when you smoke a cigarette, it does not just affect you, it affects everybody around you, emotionally, mentally, and physically. And if you are smoking outside, then it is affecting everybody within 100 foot radius. And if you're smoking inside, it is affecting everybody in the house or wherever you're smoking inside at. And not everybody has health capacity to be able to deal with it. And I'm one of those people that can't deal with it. So, when you sit there and take your break and you smoke right outside the door, I can't enter the building. And if I'm already in the building, I have a huge asthma attack when I go back to my car. This has happened before, even though it's illegal, it's happened before. And cancer is horrible. It's a horrible, horrible thing to go through. And smoking cigarettes is very well known that it easily causes cancer. And my aunt's case was definitely the case. Because the kind of cancer that she got is only caused by smoking, as far as I could tell anyways, and it's extremely rare, a rare type of cancer. Cancer from smoking is not rare, by the way. This type of cancer that she got, though, was rare, and unfortunately my mom, and a few other people in our family are smokers, and nobody did anything about it until she was on her deathbed. And smoking literally destroys lives, and cancer tears people up. It's not worth it. And I know that smoking, we all have ways of dealing with our emotions, and a lot of times it's unhealthy. I get that. I've had my fair share. This is not me casting judgment on anybody. This is just me speaking, because yesterday was when we should have done our Thanksgiving, and it just really hit home today, and so I wanted to speak on the topic. And like, I'm not teaching my regular classes, I'm just subbing right now, and so, like, it's, like, this whole, like, really weird holiday season. for at Carl and at Four Seasons. I don't have regular classes at Four Seasons though. But so it's just like this whole like weird time. So like it really does all go together. But if you've been following me, you know like how hard it was to even get into the fitness industry, and then now once I've been there, like the journey that I've been on. If you haven't, the playlist being in a bigger body in the fitness industry talks all about the entire journey. You can go see those. Now going back to so back in May, my aunt came down, so she had pneumonia. Like I said, I thought nothing of it, or well, not much of it anyways. The next day I found out she's going to the hospital, and I'm like, I thought she was just going to the doctor, because it was like a bad flare up or something. I did not realize she was like going to the hospital. And I went out to a play, and I came back and found out that she was being airlifted, because she lives in a small town, or they lived in a small town, and she was being airlifted to a hospital in a bigger city that's like halfway between our town and their town. And I was like, what? I found out last night she had pneumonia, like, and pneumonia doesn't usually get bad that fast. So I'm like, what happened? Well, I found out she had pneumonia for 8 weeks by that point. I did not know that. And she was mad because she thought it was the steroids the doctor had her on. And there's part of us, all of us, that wishes that, because she put it off too long, because she should have went a couple days before she went, going back to the doctor. She put it off too long. And so like there's a part of all of us that's like, if she'd only gone to the doctor sooner, but the reality is, even if she had gone to the doctor sooner, nothing would have changed. We would have just known a couple days sooner, and she would have probably been in the hospital a couple days longer. So she goes into the hospital, and I haven't really talked through this whole story because she's somebody who, like, my entire life, she has been a major part of, like, our big Christmas meals and Thanksgiving meals, bringing, like, the family together. My grandma was the one that, like started bringing the family together, but, like, she was a huge part of, like, the preparation and doing all the stuff. And then, even after my grandma died, like, so, like, I grew up, and she taught me from a really, really young age, like, makeup and all this stuff, and then, even when I got my driver's license, she lived in a different town, but like she helped me learn how to drive. She was like a third parent, even though she was so far away. So like all the major life events and things you go through as a kid, she was there. And it wasn't something that I was ready to talk about. I knew it was an important topic, and I'd probably do a better video. Like, this one's kind of all over the place. This is just kind of like the check-in vlog. So I'll do a better video, probably, but I hadn't really been ready until now, and I still am not sure if I'm ready, because clearly still emotional, but part of that might be because of the fact that this is Thanksgiving week, and Christmas is coming up soon, and everything is different. So she went to the hospital, and the day before Mother's Day, she was put into a coma. They induced a coma, because her breathing was so bad, and they were trying to get everything taken care of. And then she was doing better, but that night they still kept her in the coma because early the next morning, they were going to do a biopsy, and she was going to have to be put out and stuff like that. So they just kept her in the coma for a few extra hours, like overnight, instead of taking her off and then sedating her again, because it could have caused more problems. So they did the biopsy, and then that Wednesday I went with my dad, and we visited her in the hospital, and she was in ICU because her breathing was pretty bad. And at that point, she was actually doing better, and we were hopeful. Like, we thought she just had bad pneumonia. They were gonna give her some meds, and she was gonna get off the oxygen and go home, because she was put on a vent when she got there, but she didn't have she wasn't intubated. And then she was to the point where she was on like the home level of oxygen, but she was still like just getting there, or maybe not quite there yet. I can't remember. And when we went in, she was actually doing rehab, which it had only been a couple of days that she had just gotten out of an induced coma and had such horrible breathing issues that it's airlifted her to another hospital. So for like getting up and moving around at that point, and she is extremely obese. So like all of those factors, her getting up at that point and moving around doesn't surprise me in the least bit. She was a strong fighter, but I thought I could talk about this without crying, but apparently not. And I know that's okay. It's just hard to have a conversation when you're crying, and I'm a crier, but and I don't really show you guys that, so it's probably good that I'm being vulnerable. But she had went in, she was doing so much better, and so we thought, great news. And then we found out after we got back to town, shortly after that, they had gotten the biopsy results back, because they had done her lungs, and then like the next day they found something on her shoulder, which they didn't have to like put her under or anything for that, so they took that biopsy too, and we didn't think we'd find out till later on that one, but we found out both at the same time. It was confirmed both cancer, and everything went so fast from there. We went from her looking like she was doing better to having to be intubated the next day, or no, I think it was about a week later, to her saying absolutely no to hospice. She wanted to go home. Like, they couldn't send her home because she was on, I don't know medical terminology all that well. I know a lot about the body, and I talk about the body, and I'm nerdy and all this stuff, but like as far as like medical terminology, like that's a little bit beyond me, because yes, I work at a hospital, but we don't really deal with that side of things, and I wasn't actually working there at the time, so that it just, I don't know, but it was like hospital levels of oxygen where like she couldn't have went home on, and so they were trying to like get it to where it was like home level oxygen. I know that probably doesn't make sense, but there's a difference, and they used all the terms, but I don't know what any of the terms meant. So she was doing better, and then she was doing worse, and it was like if you've ever heard anybody's end of life care story, like hospice, whenever anybody at hospice gets involved, that's usually what happens, is like they'll have days where they look like they're doing better, and then it rapidly decreases, and then it like looks like rapidly, like it's just what happens. And her story was no exception. The first week though, we had no idea what was going on. Like we did know she had cancer, but then the next week she rapidly declined, had to be intubated, and then they were gonna actually paralyze one of her lungs so that it could get more oxygen, because it wasn't getting enough, and all that because it had the mass. But thankfully they didn't have to do that, because it would have killed her, because they were able to like wake her up out of the sedation and all that, because this time she wasn't put into coma, but she was heavily sedated. And once they did that, they found out that day that there was no chance of her being able to even have that lung paralyzed, because they could. So they did a scan that Tuesday, and she had 3 or 4 spots, I don't remember, of cancer. And then Thursday they did another scan, and on that scan her entire body head to toe had cancer in it. That's how fast small cell cancer progresses so fast. It's crazy. Because this was week 2 of her being in the hospital. She hadn't even been in there 2 weeks. And because of that, she had to do emergency chemo. And they're like, you probably won't make it through the chemo, but if you don't do the chemo, you won't make it past a couple of days. But the chemo might kill you too. So this might be a losing battle, but this is your best shot. So she did the chemo, and they were talking about hospice like a couple days after the chemo. And she was like, no. She couldn't really talk. We're not really sure. Like, this would happen like the day after they woke her up from the coma. Like, she couldn't really talk. And we weren't sure if it was, we're still not sure why, actually. We never did figure that out. But like, we weren't sure if it was because because she didn't have a tube down her throat until almost 2 weeks later. So the breathing, I don't know, but she couldn't really talk, and she was going to be working with speech therapists, like things were going well, and they talked about hospice, and as loud as she could, she was like, no, absolutely not. That's my aunt for you. So that was Tuesday of after she had gone through the chemo. So this is 2 weeks in, a little over 2 weeks in now. And she was like, absolutely not. And then the Thursday, all of a sudden, my mom's like, you need to talk to your dad. He went to visit your aunt because she chose hospice. And I was like, what? And then by the time from that time, because that was like morning, from that time to the time that I called, I ended up calling my cousin, because I texted him and I was like, do you want me to call my cousin or do you want me to call you? And he said my cousin. So because she had more information, because she was dealing with like getting all that stuff together, or my cousin's wife, I guess technically. But by the time I talked to her, my aunt had went from, I'm going home, I'm going to do hospice, to there's no hope and comfort care is coming in tomorrow because they can't take her home because she was on too high of oxygen. So and what that means is, if you're sensitive to this, now is probably the time to scroll to a different video. But what that means is that when comfort care comes in, that means that they no longer treat. They only make people as comfortable as they possibly can. So it's similar to hospice. It's just in the hospital instead of at home. And so they don't treat anything, but they just make sure that they're not in pain, they're not suffering, nothing's getting worse, or their pain's not getting bad or anything. So that means that anything that's treating them is taken away. So she was on oxygen, and Thursday she just declined so rapidly, and she didn't suffer for very long, thankfully, but she suffered bad that last day. And so the next day they pulled her oxygen, and she was a fighter. She hung on for a while, but they gave her fentanyl, and so she wasn't in pain. As soon as they gave her the fentanyl, she wasn't in pain anymore. But cancer destroys lives, and smoking can prevent so much of it. So I know that so many people who smoke, it's because they're dealing, that's the way of their coping with emotions that are too hard to handle, too heavy to deal with, that they haven't worked through. And believe me, I've had my own fair share of unhealthy coping mechanisms. But when you smoke, you not only put yourself at risk for going through that horrible, horrible story I just shared, but you put everybody around you in that same risk. And it's just not worth it, because you're loved and your family wants you to be here. And believe me, like, if there was another way that I could have gotten everybody's attention other than my aunt on her deathbed to get them to stop smoking, I would have. Unfortunately, that just wasn't an option. But if you're still able to listen to this video, if you're watching this video right now, you still have time, whether it's you or a family member or a friend or whoever you love, you still have time. And the worst thing that we can possibly do is sit here and judge anybody, because we are all just trying to do the best that we can and all we know how to do. So this isn't coming to you and you're a horrible person for smoking, even though I know I said smokers are the most selfish people I've ever met. It's just a frustration of a point of frustration. But because when somebody's smoking, it's affecting anybody who's anywhere near them, and in a really bad way. And sometimes that means emotionally, like I am right now. And my aunt was somebody who didn't want to have anybody mourn over her, But the reality is, when you are loved, that's what happens. And whatever life decisions you make affects anybody involved in your life. And cancer sucks, and you don't have to go through it. There's obviously there's other reasons cancer happens, but smoking very much increases that risk of cancer, and it's something that you have control over. Now, we don't always have control over whether or not we're around the smoke, unfortunately, but if you are somebody that smokes, I highly encourage you to figure out why it is that you turn to cigarettes. And I'm not saying this out of a place of judgment. I am saying this out of a place of, I've had many unhealthy habits in my life, not smoking, but that I've had unhealthy habits in my life that I've had to figure out, like, why am I turning to these instead of living the life that I want? And if I had to figure out how to work through them, the past 15 years, I've been healing from trauma and all these things. So this isn't coming out of a place of judgment. This is coming out of a place, I've walked through it. I understand it's hard. I understand that requires living life in a way that you're not used to. Getting out of your comfort zone, and all these things are scary. But I'm saying this because I love you, and I know that there are other people around you that love you, whether you see it or not. There are other people around you that love you. And if you have somebody in your life that's a smoker, I am very sorry, and I hope that you can have a loving conversation with them, just so that you can tell them how much you care about them and love them. Because sometimes telling those we care about is kind of hard to do, and I don't understand why, but like, sometimes it just is, or we don't have the words, but like, just if you have people in your life that you love, tell them, whether they're smokers or not, tell them, because we only get this one life, and it doesn't last forever, no matter who we are. And life, end of life doesn't respect people. It's not a respecter of persons. So it doesn't matter how much or little money you have, how famous you are or not famous you are, or whatever. It's going to affect everybody. And I want you to get everything out of this life that you want and you dream of. And just, I love you, and I care about you, and I want the absolute best for you, and I want you to be happy and fulfilled, and be able to tell those around you that you care about them. And I care about you, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you so much for watching. I love you. Dream big, take action, and have a good holiday.